certain problems are being described now as wicked problems. The word wicked here denotes something which is resistant to solution or difficult to solve rather than evil. So this word is not being used in that context. There are several examples around us. We are going through COVID-19 pandemic. We are going through climate change, natural hazards. Healthcare has become a problem. The AIDS epidemic, of course, was a major issue, but partly overcome. Drug trafficking, social injustice, urban waste management, and so on and on. And one aspect which is common to all these problems is that they are multidisciplinary. And if we want to address these problems, if we want to understand them, we need expertise of scientists, technologists, social scientists, policy wonks, and also several branches of human knowledge. It cannot be solved by disciplinary boundaries. So all branches of knowledge become important. There is another term which is being used these days. It's a trickster solution. It's a solution that is based on a technology that is under development, but needs 1, 2, or several decades to reach a level of maturity. One has to draw a transition path based on technologies available today and go in for mid-course correction whenever a trickster solution reaches the stage of deployment. But here again, word trickster is not being used in a negative sense. It's being used in a sense that process of development can sometimes play tricks. We may feel that solution is at hand, but it may take several years to solve. So we should continue to work on future technologies, but the transition path should be sort of designed based on present day technologies, with the idea that mid-course correction will be carried out as and when a new solution becomes available. And these two terms, wicked problem and trickster solution, are part of a lexicon of an emerging discipline called transition engineering. As all of you may recall, safety engineering emerged about 100 years ago in response to accidents and fires in industrial units. This term was not there before about 1910 or so, and it started from New York, where there are several fires in industrial units. Reliability engineering emerged in response to the needs of communication, aviation, and electrical transmission and military. Emergency management, waste management, and so on, several new disciplines have emerged. In the beginning, the first bullet, I've listed all the problems, and these are the now disciplines of engineering or science, whatever you want to call them, they have emerged. You note here, there's a multidisciplinary element in all these problems, and in the solution disciplines which have come, they are also multidisciplinary in nature. Continuing on basics,
Chai, coffee.
energy system transition has several dimensions. It is not limited to replacing one source of generation by another. Its dimensions are technological as well as socio-economic. If we see technological dimensions, they include improving energy efficiency, producing electricity based on low carbon technologies, and deploying negative emission technologies, that is carbon sinks or carbon capture and utilization. Then electrification of energy services and transportation, building and industry. Building infrastructure to accommodate intermittent sources. And if we look at the socio-economic dimension, those dimensions include achieving transition without sacrificing development agenda. I think this is very important as we are trying to transition this does not mean that we do not go in for spatial equity. We have to take everybody along, promote equity and inclusion, and ensure affordability of energy services. And this is so important, this particular transition engineering, that International Energy Agency and Conference of Parties to UN Framework Convention is holding its 26th session very soon, and they are planning a net zero summit on 31st March 2021. And International Energy Agency is planning to release its first comprehensive report, the world's roadmap to net zero by 2050, in a few months from now. And as all of you know, that India became associate member of IEA in March, about 4 years back, and has signed a framework for strategic partnership very recently. Again, continuing on basics, electrification of energy services in transportation, building, industry will result in profound structural changes in the energy sector. I think as far as transportation is concerned, everyone is familiar, the move to electric vehicles. In buildings in India, it's not much of a problem because major part of the country have no heating requirement. Only in the northern region we have heating requirement, where one can think of using a heat for heating rather than electricity. But for buildings in India, we only think of air conditioning. But globally, it's an issue. Of course, industry uses a significant part of energy, and electrification of that will mean that rather than using primary energy, we are using electricity for the purpose of transportation, buildings, and industry. In industry, energy is used for process heat, for reduction of iron ore, for production of cement, for transportation on surface, water, and air. In buildings, it's used for space conditioning, which can mean heating in winter and cooling in summer. Road transport sector is the first sector that is targeted for electrification. The other sectors, like that is aviation, shipping, and many industries, they are very, very hard to decarbonize. Unless we move to a hydrogen economy, it will be difficult to decarbonize them. Of course, research and development is ongoing to produce hydrogen from clean energy sources, which can then be used as fuel for sectors that today are very hard to decarbonize. All these changes which are taking place that is resulting in structural changes in the electricity sector. Success in transition to a hydrogen economy will accelerate structural changes. So here now we have to see what is happening as a result of these structural changes. Again, first let me go through some definitions. We use a term total primary energy supply, which I think means that whatever energy we get from coal or petroleum or other sources. And this supply for a country is made up of production plus imports and minus exports. And whatever is lost in the process of production, for example, when we use coal to produce electricity, a certain, assuming say 33% efficiency, 67% will be lost in the process of transition of primary energy from coal to electricity. So when we talk of total final consumption, we do not include whatever is lost in the process of conversion. Electricity is the most convenient form of energy from consideration of ease of end use, and also it is cleanest with regard to environmental effect at the point of use. Now, TFC by electricity is increasing due to structural changes, and there are opinions that we may need accelerated electrification and then percentage share of TFC in the final consumption will increase further. Here some data for what currently is felt with regard to this conversion. This is from a book report published by IAEA in September 2020. Final consumption in the form of energy, electricity, and percentage of total energy is 427 and electricity 80.4 exajoules. So currently in the total final consumption, electricity percentage is 18.8%. And by the middle of this century, this percentage will go to 27.2%. So I think this needs to be particularly noted. I'm referring to the report of 2020. This report is released by IAEA every year in the month of September or October. Till 2016, IAEA was reporting percentage of electricity, assuming converting the electricity to total primary energy, and then finding out these percentages. And if you see report of 2016 or earlier reports, you will find that this percentage in 2050, rather than 27.2, is little more than 50%. Of course, these numbers have to be adjusted, and one can, using the conventions of International Energy Agency, one can do some homework and try to convert this. So total percentage of electricity, if we look at primary energy, it will come more than 50%. Why this change has been made is because of the fact that we are having hydro, solar, and wind, where heat is not involved, that is directly giving electricity, while other sources like coal and petroleum products, there it's the heat and efficiency of 33% is involved. So for all these conversions, efficiency may be lower or higher, but convention followed by International Energy Agency and accepted by all academicians, 33% is the conversion factor which is used. So since there is no such conversion involved in case of solar and wind and hydro, they have changed over to giving these figures in terms of directly electricity as 27.2 and ignoring whatever is lost in the process of conversion. I think there is another issue which we should keep in mind. That's the typical grid, which figure which I could get from internet easily. And this, we have a generating station at the one end. It's shown in black color. Then we have transmission lines, which are typically high voltage lines. And whatever is generated at the generating station, there's a step-up transformer. We go through transmission, and then green color is the distribution system. At the end, we have, again, various customers who could be high voltage customers or low voltage customers. Residential will be normally 230 volts or 415 volts. Primary customer 11 kV and transmission at 33 kV. So we have to keep in mind always that at the one end we have generating station, at the other end we have consumers, and in between lies a major system. So one has to look at the totality of the system, not just generation. If you look only at the generation, talk about the cost only of generation, then we are ignoring a major part of the system which supplies electricity to all of us. With this, I think, let me show you one more system which is in Germany. This is from a publication in November 2020. Here they have tried to show solar also. The way the solar is there in Germany, it is solar parks, 7%, where they go to high voltage. 32% of solar parks there, it is 10 kV to 20 kV, And then small scale solar, which is 61% of the total, which remains at low voltage. Similar thing is about wind here, and conventional, of course, goes to very high, extra high voltage, and then it goes to consumer. I think if you recall something which Dr. Kakot referred to during the first webinar, up to kind of investment which has gone into the grid there to accommodate solar and wind. There's one additional aspect which I will like to highlight is that wind, whatever is there in Germany, is in the northern region, while load centers are the southern region. This really has made them spend a lot on their transmission and distribution system. So now we go further. With this background, I try to now move on. If you see data at the Government of India through Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation publishes a document, Energy Statistics, and this is released every year in the month of March. I'm going to quote some figure here in the first bullet, which are from March 2020 edition of the book, that primary energy availability for the decade 2008-9 to 18-19. If we see compounded annual growth rate, it was 4.16% for primary energy, and for electricity generation, it was 5.49%. This clearly tells you that electricity is growing faster than primary energy. Again, this is a reflection of structural changes, plus the fact that the government is making an attempt at, and has succeeded also to a great extent, to trying to provide electricity to all the communities on 24/7 basis. Total electricity generation in 2019-20 from utilities, non-utilities, renewable energy sources all put together was 1,600 billion units, and it translates to a per capita of about 1,200 units. Here in 18-19, again data from the publication which I referred to earlier, industry consumed 42%, domestic 24%, agriculture 18%, commercial 8%, traction and railways 2%, and other 6%. Here, just note one point, that domestic consumption is only 24%. Why I refer to this is just I want to make one point here. I mean, many people whom I talk to, they think of per capita consumption only in terms of domestic consumption, but we have to take totality. If we see, many of us are consuming 100 units per capita per annum. That means if there is a family of 2 persons staying in an apartment, their monthly bill may be maybe 150 units to 200 units. Add to it the electricity used in common areas, like in the lift in the building or lighting, and you will find in most cases, or rather in many cases of middle class families, this number 100 units per capita per annum is something quite common. And 100 units per capita per annum means 1,200 units in a year. Divide that by 24%, it comes to 5,000 units. So many of us are using 5,000 units per annum per capita. Now with this, now let us see another graph. Here on the x-axis is per capita per annum electricity consumption. On the y-axis is Human Development Index, which is a composite indicator and has 3 components: a long and healthy life, being knowledgeable, and having a decent standard of living. And HDI is a geometric mean of normalized indices for each of these 3 components. And if we want to reach an HDI of about 0.9, we need 5,000 units. And this target is very modest, considering that maybe the top top few percentage, 3, 4, 5% families in India are already using 5,000 or more. We have to ensure that we are able to bring all population in the country to this number. And if we have 5,000, aim at 5,000 units, the population of India is expected to stabilize at 1.6 billion in 2048. That is our latest information I have from various publications. 5,000 into 1.6, and assume that transmission and distribution losses will be able to bring down to what is technically lowest technically feasible number of 7%. We just had a look at the transmission and distribution grid. There is a step-up transformer, there is a transmission line, there is a step-down transformer. At every stage, there are losses, and it will be difficult to bring it to below 7%. 7% also is a very, very, I should say, tall order. So 7%, we assume that we'll be able to achieve what is considered technically feasible. So 5,000 into 1.6 is 8,000. Provide first additional 7% losses. This is what we need per annum, 8,700 billion units in this country. And I think one can see that countries in our neighborhood, Malaysia, is 4,656 units already. I quote Malaysia, a country which is a tropical climate. Thailand, 2,868. While this data is from IEA 2018, World Energy Statistics, but here I'm saying 1,200 units. This figure is for generation and this they are for consumption. So there's a difference here which you can see. But countries in our neighborhood, similarly, tropical country have reached this particular, reached this much above us. China, of course, is again 4,279. If we look at Singapore, their consumption is close to 9,000, but Singapore is mostly urban space. It may not be correct to compare India with Singapore. India, we have only 35% people living in urban areas. And if we see the past trend, urban population, this distribution is changing. 5% change in every 10 years. 10 years from now, this 35% urban population will be 40%. 10 years, 2040, it will be again further 5% higher. So around 2050, significant population will become urban, and urban spaces need more electricity. Continuing, so let us look at this target of 8,700 billion units. If we see the past growth rate, electricity generation has been growing at 5%. And looking at CAGR, let us not look at the current financial year, which because of COVID-19 can be considered as an outlier. Earlier, growth was 5%. Let us hope we'll be able to return to this 5% growth very soon. And then in 35 years from now, we'll be generating 8,700. So this is 35 years is not a very long period. Energy efficiency is improving, but as energy efficiency improves, there's an effect which comes into play. It is known as rebound effect. That means there's a systemic changes which happen that when something is cheaper, people tend to use more of it. This is the human tendency. Rather, if you go back to maybe 30 years back, there used to be one bulb or one tube light in a living room. Now, if you go, there will be some 10 lights in the same room and all burning at the same time. So we have switched on to LED. The consumption had not increased, but the rebound effect is something which will eat away part of the energy efficiency gains. And along with that, penetration of refrigerators in India is increasing. It was 27.3% in 2016 and is projected to reach 47.5% in 2026. And refrigerator is something which consumes electricity all 24/7. Households having air conditioners, they are projected to increase from 4.5% in 2017 to 31% in 2030 and 67% in 2014. I think this increase in refrigerators, increase in air conditioner, increase in cold storage space, this is something which has prompted the government to draft a cooling action plan, because this increase is significant and this is going to call for significant investment in electricity system. Food processing industries, again, are being set up. A lot of energy will be needed for them. Buildings are being constructed. Highways are all on a growth path. When I say buildings, the estimate is that the Government of India wants to provide a living space, a covered living space to everybody. And in 2050, we'll have a set of buildings in India. Today also, we have a set of buildings in India. The projection is the buildings which will be there in Indian cities and villages in 2050, 50% of them are not there today. In short, India is going through what can be called as intense infrastructure building stage. And when we build infrastructure with this kind of intensity, we need more and more energy. Where from this 8,700 billion units will come? Again, I quote government statistics from the annual report of Ministry of Renewable Energy. They have assumed that 3% wasteland can be made available for solar. And based on that, solar potential has been estimated by MNRES as 750, wind potential as 600 gigawatt, and this is assumed a hub height of 100 meters, 300 gigawatt and hub height of 100 meters. And this potential is strongly dependent on hub height. We have to go to higher and higher height to realize the full potential. Bioenergy potential is 25 gigawatt, and total generation which is possible from solar, wind, and hydro, if we assume 20% availability, is 1,900 billion units. Generation from large hydro during 1920 was 156 billion units. There is much potential at many more places which should be exploited, so this number will increase. But sum total of these two numbers is not likely to exceed a quarter of this target of 8,700. So at best, we'll get a quarter. So where from the remaining energy will come? And the rest has to come from coal on a tapering basis and nuclear, which has to be ramped up as we go further. But this is the transition which has to take place. Transition, on one hand, we exploit full potential of solar, wind, bioenergy, ramp up nuclear, and taper down coal as we ramp up nuclear, and ensuring that this requirement is ultimately met. Now, with this background, we have to examine the characteristics of various energy sources which are commonly used by the industry, and see what message are those characteristics giving us. I'll look at three characteristics today. One is levelized cost of electricity generation, system costs, and third is EROI, that is energy return on energy invested. LCOE is a very important. This is something which is embedded deep into the practices of energy professionals, of consultants. But it compares only generation and costs. It's very simple to use. It's equal to lifetime costs, that is the present value of the total cost of building and operating a power plant over an assumed lifetime, divided by lifetime energy production. When I say present value, all the values, a generator will be making some investment on maintenance, on upgradation. All those things are discounted to the present value to get the total cost, and divide by the lifetime production. And this gives you levelized cost of generation. This method was devised at a time when intermittent sources were not there. So it's very good for comparing generation from technologies having different lifetimes, but it has no parameter to account for intermittency. But since it is embedded deep into the practices of industry and it is very tortuous to change an established practice, even after the advent of variable sources like solar and wind, a tendency has been to continue to use the same method, which is erroneous. There have been attempts to devise a simple method. This method doesn't need a detailed program. It can be done on an Excel sheet, and that is what consultants have been doing. But methods which have been proposed by various academics with regard to accounting for intermittency, they have not been able to come up with a simple method which can reasonably account for everything. And conclusion is that complete system modeling is the only way to determine overall benefit and loss to the electric system from integrating new generating capacity. Given the cost of creating new capacity and integrating it into the grid, modeling can identify benefits of new capacity and loss to existing generators. I think this part is very important. Benefits of new capacity and loss to existing generator. If we add intermittent sources which are available only during the day, then coal-fired plants which have been already set up, where the cost has been sunk, which are there, they have to back down. There's a loss to the existing generator. And this loss is also a loss to the country that has to be accounted for. If those of you who are interested in looking at the detail, there's a report by P. Graham of CSIRO Australia, where he has compared LCOE and I think 5 different methods which have been proposed by researchers to compare to improve LCOE, and concluded that complete system modeling is the only answer. And this report is available on internet. It's a 2018 report, just about 2 years back. Again, because of difference in system cost, tariff at generator end is not the only parameter to determine consumer end tariff. Intermittency manifests as high system costs. So cost of solar and wind have come down, but to say that they have reached parity with coal and nuclear is erroneous. You are comparing it based on LCOE, where solar and wind are intermittent, nuclear or coal available 24/7. And to say that this is comparable, it's like comparing apple and oranges. You cannot compare intermittent sources with dispatchable sources without including cost of storage. So if we want to have a full real comparison, add cost of storage and then compare. LCOE does not differentiate between dispatchable source and intermittent source, and doesn't capture the full impact of penetration of solar and wind in a national grid. The result has been that certain policies which are being devised or which have been devised based on reliance on LCOE, those policies are untenable. And what we see in the coal sector, rising NPAs, that is the result of these untenable policies. And since several new methods which have been proposed, simpler methods are not easily available. So one has to do full system analysis and proceed further in this area. And due to high system cost of solar and wind, the cost of incremental power from renewables increases dramatically. And this is the reports from International Energy Agency, from Nuclear Energy Agency, MIT 2018 report, which was highlighted by Dr. Kakodkar in the first webinar, that also says there are several other reports saying the same thing, that LCOE over predicts the benefits which come from solar and wind, that is intermittent sources. Let me explain the system costs. We have plant level costs, which is the generator costs. We have grid level costs, and then there are other system costs. Plant level costs will be capital costs and generations costs, generation of, that is the cost of fuel, maintenance, and operation. And capital cost will manifest, whatever capital is invested, that manifests in the generation, in the tariff by way of dividend on equity and interest on loans which are taken. And grid level costs are grid connection, grid extension and reinforcement. Here, let me say that it's not only that you have to connect a wire from one point to another to transmit electricity. The wire has to have adequate capacity to transmit that kind of energy, the amperes which have to flow through that wires. Earlier, I showed you the rough grid system in Germany, and where they had to go in for a lot of reinforcement to ensure that the wind from the north, wind energy from the north is able to reach the load centers in the south. That required a lot of reinforcement of the grid. Then, of course, we have short-term balancing costs and long-term costs for maintaining adequate backup supply. Balancing costs arise because when a generator goes down because of any reason, intermittent source goes down because of any reason, some other generator has to ramp up to ensure that the consumers who are connected to the grid, they continue to get electricity. So those are the balancing costs. So these are the grid level costs, and these grid level costs, as I said earlier, they are very high for intermittent sources. Other sources consist of health externalities arising from environment effects, benefit and loss of integrity, new capacity. Then we have externalities like security of supply, resilience, cost of accidents, and net energy gain. Health externality have been quantified by studies in the Western countries. No such study, to my knowledge, has been done in India. While other externalities are difficult to quantify, and benefit and loss of integrity, new capacity, that again needs a detailed study in the country. And more of this, if you want to see, you can see in the nuclear energy and renewable system effect in low carbon electricity system. This is a report by Nuclear Energy Agency published in 2012. And there are some later reports also, but essentially this report covers all the things. Now I move to the next characteristics, that is energy return on energy invested. This is simply defined as, I think, let me first go to this. If you see a particular system, this is here we have a petroleum well, where we extract a certain amount of energy is lying in the petroleum well. When we extract it, we have to spend some amount on extraction, and maybe you will be left with 90, here is 100 megajoules, and you will be left with 90 megajoules. Then oil has to be refined, and byproducts of refining will be, we have to obtain, and what we get is 63 megajoules. Then you have to transport it to the point of use. Then, but transport, this infrastructure in the form of road has to be built, which will need some energy. So finally, what the consumer gets is 20.5 megajoules, and when we started from 100 megajoules. This is from a paper in Energy Policy of 2015. So there is energy output which the consumer is using, and there is some energy which is input to the system. So this, going back, I see there's a term EROI, which is defined as E output divided by E input. So let's assume E output as 100. And the gain to the society, which society is actually using, is E out minus E in. Now, by solving these three equations, assuming a various values of EROI, one can get the gain in percentage to the society. When EROI is very high, so the scale EROI on the x-axis is reverse. It goes from 50 here to 10 here. And this is the percentage E out which we get, that is gain to society. As long as EROI is above maybe you can say 10, gain to society is quite significant. The energy which is invested to produce energy is not very high. So here but moment we go below about 10, gain to society falls significantly. There's a steep drop here. So it has to be noted that we have to ensure that we have an energy system in the country where we are working in this region EROI. We can definitely have some sources having low EROI on the system, but overall EROI should be high. So this is an important point which we should remember. I'll explain its importance further. If we say that EROI is very low, that means that there's a lot of flow of materials to the environment, and it will have environmental consequences. Let us take, say, EROI of 2, gain to society is 50%. So that means meet the requirement of energy, you will have to spend a lot of materials have to flow through the system which is providing us energy to meet the requirement of the society. The result is environment effect increases as EROI decreases. Manpower required for this purpose also will be decreased. There are various studies available. I quote from a study from Neumeyer and Goldstone of Princeton University. They say that it is high for coal, nuclear, large hydro, and wind, but it is low for solar PV. And they have used a certain reference growth scenario to come at these numbers. So one can think of EROI in terms of an individual source or in terms of the grid as a whole. Please mute your mic, please. Somebody is speaking. Please mute your mic. So research on this subject is ongoing, but some opinions have already emerged. The US economy requires a primary energy system with a minimum EROI of 11 to enjoy a positive rate of growth. And then I think there are more in one particular paper, the way we have a Maslow's pyramid of human needs, they have this Lambert et al. They have tried to give a society hierarchy of energetic needs. If we have a very low value of EROI of 2, 3, 4, then we'll be only limited to extracting energy, refining energy, transporting energy, and growing food. But higher values like education, health, and arts, that we will be able to take care only when EROI is very high. So this is a sort of field which is emerging field. Here, if you see papers which were written earlier on this topic, particularly with regard to nuclear, they have assumed that enrichment of uranium is based on diffusion process, which is consumes large amount of energy. But later reports, since those kind of plants no longer exist, they use a centrifugal process for enrichment of uranium. So those values are high. And this value of 62, which is given here, is based on assuming that enrichment is based on diffusion process. We use natural uranium in PSWRs. And of course, we have to spend energy on heavy water production. But PSWR, we have to get this value and see where we stand. I think because we will be standing quite well in this range only, or maybe better than this, because enrichment is not there. There is a book which has been written on the whole idea of economics is based on treating energy as a factor of production as any other material. Some economists feel that when we look at economy of any country, we cannot take energy as a factor of production similar to other materials. Energy is energy, it is different, cannot be compared. So one book which is available in this area is Energy and the Wealth of Nations, an introduction to biophysical economics, where analysis of economics, the field of economics, is based on this fact, how that energy is a distinct from all other materials as input to an economy. And this severe lockdown of April, May, and June gave me enough time to go through this book. So one advantage I got from this book, Springer had at that time to take care of lockdown. They said several books are PDF is free of cost and one can download it. I ended up downloading a few books. This was one of them, and it was very educative to see a totally different perspective, to see the importance of energy in the economics. We go to another term which I like to say is social costs. I use this term because this term was used in the Government of India document, that is Economic Survey of 2017, Volume 2. Those of you who have been following this, that economic survey is released by Government of India in 2 volumes. One volume is released about 2 days before presentation of budget, and second volume is released around August, September every year. I'm quoting this social cost word from September from 2017, September 2017 documents. The first term that was coined by in the context of climate science is a social cost of carbon, where it refers to the economic cost or loss in the discounted value of economic welfare induced by an additional unit of carbon dioxide. So every unit of carbon dioxide does it. So this sort of values for the worldwide economy is given by a paper published in the Proceedings of National Academies of Science, USA, by William Nordhaus in 2017. This paper is there. William Nordhaus is an economist who won Nobel Prize for Economics in 2018. And using this data, in the government document, they have coined a term, social cost of energy generation. It denotes the sum of economic costs induced by an additional unit of carbon emission. And besides private costs of generation, earlier I referred to plant level costs. A plant level cost, this document uses private costs of generation and includes social costs of carbon, health costs, cost of intermittency, opportunity cost of land, the stranded assets. By stranded asset, what is meant is if you set up, add renewables, the corresponding coal-fired plant will get stranded. So those costs have been accounted for. And most importantly, the cost of government incentives have been accounted for. And the survey estimates that the social cost of renewable in 2017 was around 3 times that of coal at rupees 11 per kilowatt. So this is something which needs to be remembered, that social cost of renewable 11. So this 3 times means this is a hidden subsidy which is going on to the renewable sector. And I'm just exact sentence I'm reproducing from there. And then the survey strikes a cautionary note. While investments in renewable energy is crucial for India to meet its climate change goals, such investments be made at a calibrated pace, looking at the total costs accrued to society. So we have to look at the total cost. what it amounts to is when we talk of merit order dispatch, which is now prevalent in the country, it's the lowest variable cost which is considered as a merit. But is it the only merit? On the one hand, we are talking about increase in temperatures, increase in particulate emissions. What happens in the entire northern belt every year in winter is well known. And then we think that lowest variable cost is the only merit. This is something which is an anomaly. We have to move to a regime where merit is defined to include all social costs. And a country where the cost of capital is very high cannot afford to ignore the costs which have been already sunk. So here now I move on to the how to evolve future electricity mix for India. Both extremes that only renewables can provide all electricity needs at the global level. Uh, and this particular view is being proposed in various papers, lectures, books, articles by Professor Mark Jacobson of Stanford University. And he has written, I think, along with some of his colleagues, given a paper in Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences, USA in 2015, using a certain methodology. And there are papers which severely tear apart all the logic which he has been giving, point out deficiency in models and everything. And of course, there is an opposite view that nuclear energy is a silver bullet. So both views, one opposed to the other, they exist in the literature. And when anyone talks about nuclear, they talk about its military ancestry, proliferation concerns, waste management, and I think all these issues have been discussed ad infinitum, so I will not go in that direction. Let me come to a very recent briefing by Environmental Protection Agency of USA. There they have tried to quantify the wastes which will arise from solar, and amounts quoted are humongous. So what they say is that for 2050, USA will have 10 million tons of solar waste, China 20, India 7.5, Japan 7.5, Germany 4.3. Add all these together, 10, 20, 30, and around 50 million tons. This 50 million tons you compare with something like which is less than 500,000 tons by the total nuclear waste which has been generated right in the beginning up to 2013. This data is from IAEA, while this is from EPA of USA. How this solar waste will be disposed? What is the cost of disposal? Is the cost of disposal included in the project cost of solar? I have not been able to get this information from anywhere. I'll of course keep looking, but so far I have not got it. How it will be disposed and is the cost included? So for electricity generation and associated waste management, issues to be examined are safety, security of supply, resilience against severe events, whether severe events are man-made or because of natural causes, environment effects, resource durability, availability of technology, and affordability. Resource durability and availability of technology are not the only determining factor. We have to, resource durability and environment effect are not the only determining factor. All the factors have to be seen as we plan an energy mix for India. So if you look at all these factors, you don't get an answer which is yes or no for any technology. There's always a shades of gray with regard to every technology. So what we have to do, we have to have a mix of all low carbon technology, that is hydro, nuclear, solar, and wind. And until generation from these technologies can be ramped up to meet the requirement of the country, coal has to continue, maybe on a tapering basis. We have to think of efficiency improvements in coal sector, pollution abatement measures, and carbon capture and utilization as and when it is due. So essentially what we need is a broad portfolio of energy option, and that portfolio can facilitate transition to a near zero emission energy system. One issue that has not been debated in detail in our country and also at the global level is the safety of storage. Everyone thinks of safety of storage when we think of hydrogen storage, but even in battery storage systems, there are issues, and several fires have been reported in energy storage systems based on batteries. It so happened that Korean Times reported earlier this month a news item which says there have been 10 fires in energy storage system in Korea in 2020. Just in 1 year, 10 fires. Similar fires have been reported from Liverpool in UK, from Arizona in USA, and so on. So there have to be safety regulations for battery storage, which I understand are yet to be developed, and the safety features will have to be engineered, and that also will attract insurance as well as other costs. This I'll now go through very briefly, since I think Dr. Kakotkar covered this issue, that 700 megawatt PSWR unit has been connected to the grid. PFBR, we are developing technologies for the next generation system. Prototype fast breeder reactor is under commissioning. Recycled technologies along with actinide partitioning have been already developed in India, and uranium is available from international market after the relaxation of nuclear suppliers guideline in 2008 for the program, of course, that is under IAEA safeguards, and a program for construction of several 700 megawatt PSWRs has been approved. This is, I think, well known to the DAE community, and several talks have been there on this topic. So I come to the end now, and just let me summarize. Demand for electricity in India is growing, and growth is due to two factors: increase in GDP and quality of life, that is one factor, and second factor is the structural changes which are occurring in the energy sector and leading to increased percentage of electricity in the total final consumption. So while decarbonization is a necessity, it should be achieved in a manner that development goals are not affected. Electricity is an important enabler for green transition, and at present, the only way to tap solar and wind power. It will require investment, but will also provide opportunity for growth and employment. The transition will definitely lead to a clean environment, but it will raise tariff, but also reduce external health costs. So all this put together will be a net gain for the consumer, but to promise consumer a lower tariff is not the right approach. We are misleading them. Tariff will go up. While India should manage transition based on technologies that are deployable now, the development should be continued on future technologies such as generation of hydrogen from clean electricity, next generation nuclear reactors, storage solution with safety regulations, and carbon capture, sequestration, and use. So decarbonization of electricity mix is more than mere replacement of one technology with the other. It has several dimensions and can be best managed by having a diverse portfolio of technologies. I'm again and again emphasizing a diverse portfolio, because as diversity provides security against supply disruption, resilience against severe events, and hedging against price fluctuations. Therefore, all low carbon technologies should be tapped and provided with a level playing field in terms of finance, siting, and obligations for purchase by DISCOMs. I think this was a point which was made by Dr. Kakotkar as well earlier. And the government will have to activate multiple policy levers to achieve a level playing field for all low carbon technologies. So I just want to show this. All of you must have read this story of 6 blind men and an elephant at some stage or the other. If we keep working in compartments, conclusions will be something like this. While there's an elephant there, somebody will call it a spear, somebody will call it a wall, somebody will call it a what you call it, fan, and so on and so forth. There are two versions of this story, 7 blind men and 6 blind men, but the conclusion is that we have to look at the system as a whole. Otherwise, we'll end up reaching similar conclusion as were reached by these 6 different people in the story, which all of you must have read as a popular Indian fable. So, thank you. I hear that since nuclear can produce all 3 carbon vectors, low carbon vectors, that is electricity, heat, and hydrogen, it should have the advantage. And Indian Nuclear Society is eminently suited to propagate this message. So for further reading, I will like to refer to 3 publications. The first one here indicates that India has developed all technologies. This provides various narratives which are existing, and this is something my lecture is based on this. And the fact that 700 megawatt PSWR is fully developed, that is something which Mr. Balasubramaniam, A.K. Balasubramaniam from NPCIL has written in a very recent issue of e-newsletter of INS, November 2020. And that really tells you the strength of NPCIL, how they have evolved 700 megawatt unit to this level. And I hope this program of NPCIL will move on. Thank you. I close here. And now I think we can take question answer, Dr. Tiwari.
Yes, sir. We will take questions from audience. There have already been many questions in the chat box. So one by one, we will take questions from the chat box, and other people also may please send in the chat box. So I will request Mr. Shankar Koiri. He had the first chat in the chat box. So probably he would like to ask his question. Mr. Shankar Koiri. I request others to please mute because we are getting disturbance. Yes, please.
Hello, sir. It is a nice talk. It is very informative. Thank you, sir, for the nice talk. My question is already answered there. I wanted to know in 5,000 unit calculation in HDI, this domestic consumption is considered or industrial consumption is also included?
It's the overall consumption which I referred to. As I said, that only 24% is a domestic consumption. The remaining is in industry, 42% in industry, then in transportation, then in agriculture, all together 5,000. And in my personal opinion, 5,000 is a very, very modest number. We need more than this.
Okay, thank you, sir. So one more question, if you permit me to answer.
Yeah, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Sir, in your slides, you showed that for the solar cell, the calculation is 3% wasteland is equivalent to 750 megawatt, but the government is targeting to 220 megawatt by 245 gigawatt by 2022. So how it is possible to achieve the solar energy target?
It should be gigawatt only there. Let me go through that.
It is written 7.
Sorry, that's a typo. It should be gigawatt. I'll correct it. It should be 750 gigawatt.
If permit, one more question. I have a doubt actually. Could you permit me to answer a question? One more question, query to clear.
Please.
Yeah. So I want to know this nuclear power plants take so much time to establish, say like 10 to 15 years. And a lot of investment has to be done there. Maybe there's a political and the social problems there that because of that the nuclear plant gets time. But I want to know if someone invests in a nuclear plant, when he start getting profit from that, including the investment and the loan, etc.
Look, NPCIL is a profit-making company. I think that answers, one sentence answers your question.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Okay, so we will go next to question of Dr. Lokesh Kumar. He had one chat in the chat box. Lokesh Kumar, please, if he is there. And I request others to keep on mute. Mr. Mehatre, please mute yourself. And Lokesh Kumar, please ask the question. Okay, he seems to be not available. Then Dr. Vijan Warrior had raised a question. Dr. Vijan Warrior, please. Mr. Mehatre, please mute yourself.
Actually, I didn't have any question. I wanted to thank Dr. R.B. Grover. Thank you for a good lecture.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we move to Dr. P.R. Vaidya. He had put a comment in the comment box. Dr. Vaidya.
Yeah, am I heard?
Yes, please.
Yes, you are heard.
Sir, this HDI versus electricity consumption, it looks like a chicken and egg problem. Is it that the electricity consumption, wasteful electricity consumption goes up when the living standard improves? There should be some model, which delinks this human development from the pure electricity consumption. Is it possible?
There are better models which are available. First of all, let me tell you, I see you have written in a chat box also as to correlation is not causation. Correlation is correlation. Don't think correlation in terms of causation. That is number one. Number two, wasteful electricity is something which has to be decided by social norms. If somebody from who was living in 1950 was to come here, okay, I'll give my personal example. Growing up as a child in North India, I could see that the norm was that one fan in a house is good enough to take care of summer. Then standard moved from one fan to one ceiling fan in every room. From there, we moved to one air conditioner in a room, then air conditioner in all the rooms. Now, is it wasteful or is it required? This answer you have to give. This is a social norm which all of us have to, what you call it, decide and move on. And wasteful or not wasteful is the choice of individuals. But the fact is consumption is going up. Many of us, as I've said, I have done this calculation, spoken to many friends, are already consuming more than 5,000, and it will keep going up and up. Mr. Vaidya.
Yeah, I know. No,
Yeah,
the question is highest to lowest consumption. Like the salary we talk, the highest to lowest. The lowest to highest consumption also, there should be some kind of social responsibility where the highest consumption is limited to say 10 times of the lowest consumption.
Oh,
Somebody has 64% houses having a air conditioner. And now it's almost a moon today. I mean, it looks, if we reach that, perhaps we may not have electricity at all to cater to that.
Yes, we have to work in that direction. I said that in the beginning itself, I said that the transition has two dimensions, technological and socio-economic. We are referring to socio-economic dimensions. Well, they have to be simultaneously addressed. But this is something which we can keep discussing and discussing. I think we cannot arrive at solution. There, it requires self-discipline. It requires moderation. And with that, we have to move.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Suresh Kumar raised his hand. So, Dr. Suresh Kumar, please come with your question. Dr. Suresh Kumar. Okay, I think his audio is not coming.
No, thank you, sir.
Okay, okay. Please.
Regarding wasteful or thing, I consider any resources should be consumed very judiciously. Wasteful consumption of resources is not good. Seeing the global environment and other things. One more question is that for the carbon footprint wise, which is the energy source which is best? Is it not hydroelectric?
Oh, okay. I think you are talking about externalities of different sources. I think this is the data available, as I said, for health externality, which takes care of carbon, which takes care of all other sources. That is, data is available. I did try to give those projections. Here, nuclear and wind are very good. Solar is good. Hydro is good. Only problem with coal and all the fossil fuels. To say that hydro is the best is definitely not so, because in case of hydro sources also, because of the water storage, there is a generation of methane from the submerged plants, which is also having a certain climate effect. So I'll call all these sources I said, solar, wind, hydro, nuclear as low carbon sources, and this is the source, 4 sources we should go ahead.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Suresh Kumar. We would like to take up the next question from Dr. T.L. Prasad. Dr. T.L. Prasad, if you are there to ask your question, please ask.
Yeah, good morning, sir. It was a nice presentation. Just I would like to know that per capita consumption for many countries started coming down. In this scenario, whether you would like to suggest some of the energy options to be closed for developing countries? It is only a critical question. Just I would like to hear your views.
Coming
Thank
down
you.
in which countries? Those countries which are at 14,000, 15,000, if they come down a little, but we are nowhere there. We have a long way to cover. As I said, even in countries around us, again, similar tropical climate has already reached close to 5,000. And we are leave apart the middle class, which is consuming 5,000. Others have yet to reach that level. So we have to look at providing electricity to the all sections of society at affordable prices. And electricity will spur development, and development will call for more electricity. They will go hand in hand together. But while we do so, we have to be conscious of environment and use low carbon sources.
Okay, so may we go to the question from Dr. Braj Mishra. Braj Mishra, please unmute and ask your question.
Yes. Dr. Groverji.
Yes, Mishra ji.
What is your advice for the best energy mix scenario in India by 2035?
As I said, that we have to tap all possible low carbon sources, that is solar and wind, and ramp up nuclear. Now, with regard to solar, the note of caution is that its EROI is very low. It will mean large flows of material, large manpower requirements. I think something which is not well known is that manpower requirement for solar is quite high. So, moment there's a large flow of materials, and I gave the data from EPA of USA as to how many million tons of this photovoltaic panels will have to be handled, waste will have to be handled. We have to see that also. But still, okay, we exploit solar, we apply wind, nuclear, and the rest from the coal. Development agenda of the country should not be sacrificed as we move on.
Okay.
Just to say
Thank
that
you.
we have to preserve the environment, we do not have to sacrifice development.
Thank you.
Okay, so we would like to go to Dr. Venugopal. He has raised his hand. Please. Unmute, please. Unmute yourself.
It's a very interesting lecture, Dr. Grover. Dr. Kakodkar has mentioned that zero emission, carbon emission by 2050. That is a kind of a plan. What is the penalty? Supposing we are not able to achieve that that zero emission by 2050, there will be penalty on countries?
So far, no penalty has been talked about. And achieving zero emission is not going to be easy, particularly for India. So we have to keep doing the best we can. But to say that we'll be able to achieve zero, I think it's a tall order. We have to do keep on continue our R&D on various new reactor systems, on hydrogen production, on improving efficiency of solar cells, on all these areas. Okay. And sort of come up with this current fleet of 700 megawatt is under construction. We have to plan more such fleets and move on. But to say that we'll be able to achieve zero by 2050 is not it's a very tall order. But one doesn't know that tomorrow we have suddenly some new breakthrough results and we can achieve faster. But I find it's going to be a difficult task.
Okay. One more, can I ask one more simple question?
Yes, please. Yeah.
This is with respect to the kind of a disadvantage of the photovoltaic cell disposition in the case of a large plant and also the lithium batteries. Similarly, in the case of windmills, there are, for example, Satara in about 5-6 years before they said their rainfall has decreased because of the setting up of windmills there. So there are issues with respect to this renewable sources of energy. I think that also has to be focused because there will be public acceptance will be also to be taken into consideration. Today, a large amount of these things are being introduced. I think we have to look at the future consequences of such large introduction of renewables also.
Yes, that research is in its infancy. This windmills, for example, that is, there are issues which people are now discovering as more and more windmills are being set up. There was a report, for example, windmills which have been set up on the Western Ghats. Because the windmills have been set up, the large birds have vanished from that area. They have gone away. Those large birds used to feed on small insects. And the population of insects has gone up. Now, this means that windmills, though we think of them as totally benign, that is also has a certain interaction with environment. What will be the consequences of this change of insect population? Only future will tell us. Today we don't know. That report was silent on the effect of this issue. This is from, again, Western Ghats ecology is the way it is getting changed because of windmills. There are reports from USA because of large windmills which are being set up. It means that the temperature in a certain area, there's a mixing of temperatures. That is also having influence on the, this report is from Texas area. So there is a influence on the local ecology, what is growing there. A temperature change of 1, 2, 3 degrees can mean a lot at times. Then there are philosophical viewpoint. There are some people who think of environment as something instrumental. Some who think environmental as intrinsic. Those who think that environment is something has to be preserved for its intrinsic beauty. They say that when you have so many windmills, it disturbs the total landscape. But if those who look at from the instrumental point of view, they feel, yes, it is okay. So these are the various philosophical views also with regard to this. So these are the areas on which nuclear is something we have lived for a long time. We know everything, positives and what are those things which have to be taken care of, where we have to observe precautions. But when it comes to wind and solar, these issues are yet to be addressed. And the latest windmill which has been designed, they are larger and larger blades. How those blades have to be disposed of, there are issues, those also are emerging because of increasing deployment of windmills.
Thank you, sir. On behalf of Dr. Venugopalan, may we take the next question from Sri Sanat Kumar? He has raised his hand. Sri Sanat Kumar, please.
Yes, Dr. Grover.
Yeah.
My question is like this. In the estimation of the social cost of nuclear power projects, I'm sure you've taken into account the exclusion zone, the disaffection of people due to acquisition of the exclusion zone. After all, you're acquiring it, so you are paying the money. But in the case of sterilized zone or the so-called natural growth zone, we are not acquiring it. And there is a tremendous amount, there is likely to be a tremendous amount of disaffection there. So in the cost of nuclear power projects, is this taken into account? Thank you.
The data which I presented from the Economic Survey Volume 2 of 2017, that compares social costs of coal versus renewables. It does not talk of nuclear. So that calculation has not been done. In that particular, they have considered alternate land use costs. So that means the economists have methodologies for that. One has to do it for nuclear, but it has not been done so far.
Okay, we will like to take either the comment or the question from Sri S.K. Sharma.
Thank you, sir. This is not a question. Actually, I wanted to respond to one question which was regarding the return on investment being made in the nuclear power plants. Dr. Grover had briefly responded to that, but I thought that maybe I can take a little more time. It is true that nuclear power is characterized by, on one hand, the high gestation period and high capital investment. But on the other hand, it also has low marginal cost of production and very high life of the assets. Taking all these things into consideration, the tariff of nuclear power is fixed, where the cost of capital and the gestation period by way of interest during construction gets factored in. Now, just to give you some numbers, because evidence is always more convincing. Just to give, for the last financial year, that is the year 2019-20, NPCIL had a total revenue of 4,200 crore rupees. That is the cost of electricity we sold. And on this revenue of 4,200 crore, NPCIL earned a profit of 6,000 crore, 42%. So that is the kind of return it is generating, the profit it is generating for the people who have invested. Of course, they had to wait for 5 years. So that is the kind of economics. And as Dr. Grover said, that nothing is black and white, black or white. It is all shades of gray. So it has its own merits and demerits. Thank you, sir, for giving me the opportunity. That's all I have to say.
Yes, sir. Yes, I see question from, there are some more questions in the chat box here. Dr. Tiwari, you are muted now.
Muted.
Thank you, thank you. So I am requesting Dr. Vatsa, he had commented a little while back and may he put his comment openly. Please unmute yourself, yeah.
Yeah, Thank you, Tiwari. As usual, a pleasure to listen to Dr. Grover from several talks that I have heard, either in BRC or outside. So thank you so much. It's a food for thought and a lot of points to ponder, what we do with energy, how much we do. And a question will always remain, how much is required and how much is that we want to go? As somebody asked, whether it is useful or wasteful. So this question is individually driven. We have to decide. And you very rightly gave the example of North India. I also started from Delhi, and this was the same story of 5 or 6 people sharing one fan. And then finally, now every room has an air conditioner. So this will go on. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Vatsa. We will like to take the question of Dr. Dinesh Chandrakar. If you are there, Dr. Chandrakar. Okay, seems he has left. So
hello, sir. I'm here.
Okay, please. Then you can.
Yeah. So Grover sir, thanks. Thank you very much, sir. It was a very exciting lecture. Sir, I want to ask about this fusion technology. Title of participation is there, and once the ITER demonstration is successful, how much India is going to be? How much we are going to gain from that experiment, and what is our preparedness for that to harness the expected technology?
Well, I said that we should keep developing advanced technologies. That development work should not be stopped. But today, if we think in terms of deployment, we have 700 megawatt PSWR, a successful story. We should deploy that. At the moment, better technologies are developed, are available, then we should apply a mid-course correction and change in that direction. So this does not mean that we stop technology development. Whatever sitting in hall number 7, you have been working on new technologies, please keep developing those technologies, bring it to the stage of deployment. Once they are deployed, you can move further.
Sir, my question was about fusion technology. Fusion.
About which technology?
Fusion technology.
Fusion technology.
Yes,
okay.
Fusion technology.
Fusion technology is something which intense research is going on worldwide.
Yes.
One collaborative project is ITER, which is coming up in south of France, where the current schedule is that we'll have first plasma in December 2025, but the COVID-related delays are not accounted for in this. Maybe we'll know it soon. And but this is only first plasma. DT operation will take further 10 years, and a demonstration unit which demonstrate viability of fusion maybe 2040, 2045, and then only one can think of commercial units. So that is as yet far away. So this will come under the category of technologies under development, and when we make the current plans, you should use only those technologies which are well known. But of course, we should continue to participate in ITER.
Okay, thanks. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Chandrakar. Actually, there are a lot of questions one by one I am taking. Dr. Ram Swarup, Dr. Ganeshan, Dr. Manchanda have raised hand. I have taken note of it. But first, I will go to Dr. H.L. Bajaj. He is waiting for a long time. Dr. Harbans Lal Bajaj, please. Please unmute and come in.
First of all, thank you very much, Dr. Grover.
Namaskar, Bajaj sahab.
Namaskar. I'm honored and pleasure listening to you. I just wanted to, somebody asked why don't we go all for hydro? Hydro potential has been assessed by Central Electricity Authority long ago, and it is at about 150,000 megawatts, that is 150 gigawatt, and our present peak requirement is about 190 gigawatts. So obviously hydro alone cannot meet the requirement, and therefore, as rightly advised by Dr. Grover, we have to have a mix of all low carbon technologies. Thank you. That was all what I wanted to mention.
Thank you, Vidas sir.
Dr. A.P. Jayaraman had either put a comment or a question. May I request him to come in and express himself? Dr. A.P. Jayaraman. Are you there, Dr. Jayaraman? Looks he has left. If he comes in, we will ask his question later. May I request Dr. Ganeshan? Dr. Ganeshan, please. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Grover, for the very nice, interesting, informative, and highly useful talk. I wanted to pose two questions. One is that do we have any plans to provide the lower bound and upper bound curves for the energy growth scenario in nuclear energy in the Indian context?
I think this is a difficult question. And this revolves around the needs of society. There were certain needs, say 50 years ago, citizens used to be satisfied and happy with the availability of certain amount of energy and certain amount of material. And today, that lookout has changed. Everyone needs much more. And for, say, when we look at the younger generation, their thought process, their thinking is different, and we cannot impose our thinking on them. So this will, or so-called needs of society have been evolving, and they will continue to evolve. So for any government or any individual organization to say that, yes, needs should be limited to this number is difficult, and rather that is the criticism of Brundtland definition of sustainability. It is thinking of needs of future generation when we do not know the needs of present generation properly. The needs have evolved, expectations have evolved, aspirations have evolved, and this will keep on evolving. And I find that giving a lower bound and upper bound limit to energy requirement is not a question which can be answered by technologists. Sociologists may have some answer, but I don't think they can give a precise answer.
No, I think that when you are talking of the Bhabha's three-stage program, there is a section of the public who feel dissatisfied that the projected target growth was never achieved. Now, question is, if we had been frankly giving the upper and lower bound, today PHWR technology, as you rightly said, is well established. I would say it is well established within quotes, because you really have to go through the full cycle, fuel cycle, including reprocessing everything, and what do we do with the fuel, and the waste also goes to be getting monitored for over centuries. So now question is, you look at the energy growth scenario in Japan, they had a projection curves, and the entire thing has gone to negative domain because of Fukushima. Now we talk of energy growth due to our own fast reactor program, and we have often said that the PHWRs cannot sustain unless we have the fuel, and that has been now clarified that fuel is available due to our international sanctions being lifted. But there are always problems in any scientific endeavor. Nuclear energy is still in the first learning path of the curve over the last 70 years. So as physicists and scientists, the Bhabha's three-stage program has given an excellent scope for the department and in the Indian context to provide an infrastructure in R&D. The future energy growth, I believe, is subject to a lot of uncertainties, and we don't have the stamina or the confidence to go and tell the people, look, this is my upper bound, I will achieve if this works well, and this is my lower bound if this doesn't work well, and these are all the uncertainty bands. This kind of uncertainty band giving culture is not there in our system. This is what I want to point out.
I think this, what you are asking will require a totally different lecture. here idea was not to give a target for nuclear or for any other source. Idea was to give that we have to plan a transition path where nuclear has to be prominent. But to just give you a brief answer, we have come to the stage where uranium is available in adequate quantity only in 2008. Subsequent to 2008, 4 reactors of 700 megawatt construction was started, and first of 4 has been connected to grid, and remaining 3 will be connected one after the other in a period of next 2 years or so. And 12 more reactors of 700 megawatt construction has been announced, or in some way they have been sanctioned, and the work is going on. So we are going on this path, and reprocessing plants are working, and prototype fast breeder reactor has been completed and is going under commissioning. So we are definitely going ahead. Now, you want to say targets in terms of implementation? Well, that I think is not the my topic today. That will want a different lecture. Maybe we'll plan that as well.
So on behalf of Dr. Ganeshan, I thank you, sir. And we will take up the question from Dr. Ram Sarup. He is waiting for a long time. Actually, there are a lot number of people waiting. So, and they are impatient. They are raising hands again and again. I have taken note. I will give chance one by one. There is plenty of time. So Dr. Ram Sarup, please. Dr. Ram Sarup, please.
Upper and lower bound, I wanted to comment something.
Yeah, it will. Your chance will come, Dr. Suresh Kumar. But let us give chance to Dr. Ram Sarup. He is waiting for a long time.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, my question is, while comparing different sources of power, in case of nuclear power, have we taken the resources to be used and the waste will be produced during decommissioning? Because decommissioning, sometime or the other, of an operating power station has to be done. I think taps 1 and 2 is now nearing that stage. That is the question.
Answer is yes. Nuclear energy definitely thinks in terms of waste disposal and decommissioning, not only in India, but globally. But this thought process is yet to be imbibed by solar and wind. That is why those issues are being raised now.
Because we will be using a lot of resources and good amount of waste, and also that will be respective waste to be produced during decommissioning.
There is a levy which is charged as a part of the fuel and kept by NPCIL, and that provisions for that have been made in the system. In the system.
Okay, thank you very much.
One person with the abbreviation MB, M for Mango, B for Bombay, has been waiting for some time. So please come in. We can't see your full name, but we noted the abbreviations. MB. Okay, seems not around. So we will go to question from Nidhi. Are you there? Nidhi? No. So we can give a chance to Dr. Suresh Kumar once again. He wants to give his comment about that upper and lower bounds on.
Right.
Yeah, please. Please keep it short, sir, because as Dr. Grover said, it requires a separate lecture. So, yeah.
So the very nice, very serious talk and all that. I thought I should put some humor also. Dr. Ganeshan asked upper and lower bound, and Dr. Grover could not answer, or he doesn't have figure. But had he given, he would have asked, what is the error bound in that figure? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for this humor.
It is the same. It's the same. Upper and lower bound, error bound. Both are same.
President INS Dr. Mehta want to comment on this comment a bit.
I think there cannot be any lower and upper thing. I was born in a region where there was no fan. We used to use hand fans. And the temperature they used to go to be above 40 degrees centigrade. And there were no refrigerator, but no food was wasted. They knew how to manage the situation. In the night, we used to wet our clothes and sleep properly. No problem. I think the demand for that is dependent upon today. Today, I met somebody recently, and that family said that in the winter, November, December in Bombay, they have the AC on and then the blanket on that one. So the social need are changing that one. So the question is the need, there's no upper bound and lower bound. I think we have to see what is our social need and what is our social resources and where we should spend our money. I think that is the thing that we have to do that one. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. So now we have exhausted the questions except of one from our Vice President, Dr. Vijay Manchanda. So I have two requests to him. One is to ask his question and second is to also wrap up, give your concluding comments on it. Manchanda ji, please.
Yes, Dr. Grover, my question is, recently, maybe a day or two back, we read the news that the new US administration has again decided to join that climate change group, that Biden administration. So do you have any comment on that? Particularly, there was a time I thought you were also very keenly following the R&D in the area of carbon sequestering. So what has been the type of investment in R&D in that area, and whether India figured anywhere in this work?
Carbon sequestration. Well, I think the worldwide, it has been demonstrated at the lab scale, but before it can be really deployed at the scale at which we need, we have quite some time to go. This again is something which exactly in India, at what stage we are, I don't think I know the exact answer. On carbon sequestration, no, I will not be able to answer the stage of development or sequestration in India. All I know is that worldwide, it is at a very, very low level. So we have to move much further to really think in terms of deployment.
So with the coming back of US in this arena, whether some more investment is likely to go up?
There will be investment in US definitely in this area with Biden announcing joining of again in the climate change agreement. So we have to wait and see. How...
So there is another small question, if you permit. These fast reactors have been sort of, one step forward, two step backward, internationally I am talking. The France, Japan, they are a sort of, I will say, not progressing, let me put it at least this way. Do you still feel that the future of fast reactor in India is good? It is okay?
I think we should continue to work on fast reactors. Yes, the countries are going to and fro in this area. Let us first see that Russia has been moving ahead with fast reactors. China is moving ahead with fast reactors. There are setbacks in France, in Japan. In case of USA, they worked on fast reactors early in the program and subsequently after I think it was in the Reagan administration that they decided
Carter administration.
Carter administration, they decided to forego. And there's a full report at that time, which was written by...
Clinch River breeder reactor.
No, ANL.
Clinch River breeder reactor that was abandoned.
No, that reactor was done. But what I'm saying is during Carter administration, after that report from Mitre think tank,
yeah, metal
there's a big book by Mitre think tank, which is there in our BRC library, which talks about why that was abandoned. While they have not come to fast reactor, but at the same time, there is something very interesting. In 2010, President of USA appointed a Blue Ribbon Commission on Nuclear Energy. Blue Ribbon Commission is a high-level commission which is appointed in USA whenever they want to look at it. There's a very clear recommendation in that report of the Blue Ribbon Commission that R&D on closing the fuel cycle should be continued. I think that tells us the real thinking which is going on in the USA, that they want to continue it in the R&D level. At some stage, they may come back. They will calibrate it depending upon the resource position. So I think we have a different resource position. Considering our resource position, I'm not talking of only uranium resources, I'm talking of all energy resources. We have to keep working on fast reactors.
Exactly.
Thank you, Dr. Grover. Now let me do my second part as a sort of concluding remarks. Friends, all of you may have noted Dr. Grover has educated us as a scientist, and also, I will say, given us a lot of information as a social scientist also. I think that is the hallmark of a good leader. That is what Dr. Grover is. See, he has given us the real insight of the low carbon electricity mix of various sources, be it nuclear, be it wind, or hydro, or solar. But as a social scientist, he has educated us a lot in this. But how our HGI index need to move from 0.64 to 0.9 so that India also comes, so far as the standard of living is concerned, at a reasonable level actually. I think another important thing I noted is, he has said that it is not correct to promise for the low tariff actually. In fact, I think this is first time I am hearing from him. It is not a good sign of a developing society to promise for the low electricity tariff. And also, of course, he has, of course, Mehtaji also mentioned, and he has mentioned how our refrigerator or our ACs are going to rise exponentially in the years to come. Actually. So I think a wonderful talk, Dr. Grover, and I hope that your support will be continuing so far as the Indian Nuclear Society programs are concerned. And in general, of course, I will like to make a mention for all the members that your support is very important. This web series by Dr. Tiwari has already now taken a good shape. You must be already receiving the newsletter from INS. In fact, the 4 such issues have already come. So we like you to continue to give us the feedback and support the INS activities. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Manchanda sir. So I will request now Sri Kishore Agarwal to propose the vote of thanks. Sri Kishore Agarwal.
Good afternoon, sir. I thanks on behalf of INS, Padma Shri Dr. R.B. Grover, sir, for enlightening us on a very diverse subject, managing a transition to low carbon electricity mix in India, and accepting our invitation as a speaker for this webinar. I thanks Dr. A.P. Tiwari, sir, and the INS committee, managing committee, for arranging this webinar. Lastly, I thanks all the participants for making this webinar successful. Thanks a lot.
Before I end the meeting, if it was a live lecture, I mean, in a hall or something, we would have stood up and given a standing ovation to Dr. Grover. Here it is not possible, but I request everyone to unmute and give claps. Unmute and then give claps. Please.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, very much. And with that, I will end, but let me say that one more event of again a very renowned personality in less than 1 month's time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.